Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Vest Sobot, sitting in for Jocelyn Bamford. Every week, we introduce a thought leader and business person to tell their story, unpack the challenges of building strong organizations, and share ideas for prosperity. My guest today is Dr. Brian Lee Crowley, founder and CEO of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa, one of the most recognized and awarded think tanks, not just in Canada, but in the world. He and his colleagues at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute are frequent commentators on public policy in print, on TV, and in social media. Dr. Crowley served on the editorial board of the Globe and Mail. He is also author of 3 Canadian bestsellers, Fierce Symmetry, The Canadian Century, and Gardeners versus Designers, Understanding the Great Fault Lines in Canadian Politics. I'm in the middle of reading this book for a second time, and I absolutely love it. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Please share with our audience your amazing journey so far. What does the MLI do, and how did it start?
Well, let's start with how it started. It's kind of an interesting story. You know, I was asked by Jim Flaherty, who was then the Minister of Finance, to come up to Ottawa as the Clifford Clark visiting economist. And that's a fancy name for the sort of one-man in-house policy gadfly and economic policy advisor for the federal government. I had the rank of an assistant deputy minister. I went up to Ottawa, sat with all the senior civil servants around the board table at finance. We, determined what went into the budget and sent it up to the minister for sign off and so on. And after 2 years doing that, I mean, you really get a lot of insight into how Ottawa works from that perch. And after 2 years, my appointment was up. I was going back home to Halifax, where I then lived. And I thought to myself, these guys really need help. I had discovered what an incredible mess Ottawa was, how little control the politicians and civil servants had, how much money was wasted. I mean, all kinds of things. And as I was leaving, I asked myself, well, what can I do to help? Because, if Ottawa's working badly, it's not serving the interests of Canadians. And the answer I came up with was, I said, okay, now why is it that Ottawa is the only G7 country that doesn't have a national think tank in the national capital talking about national policy to national policymakers, the national media, and the national electorate? I thought that was a big hole in our democratic infrastructure, and I set out to fill it. And the way I set out to fill it was creating the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which, our sort of slogan is ideas matter. And of course, in a show about innovation, you got to care about ideas. But every innovation is a new idea, right?
So true.
And so now Victor Hugo said, ideas are the most powerful force in the world. They're more powerful than all the armies. And I believe that that's true. And if you really want to affect policy, whether it's in Canada or anywhere else, what you need to do is you need to show people why the ideas they have in their heads, the ideas about what kind of military we should have, or the ideas we have about unemployment insurance, or the ideas about tax rates and so on. And you got to say, okay, you've got this idea about how that works and how it should work. I'm here to give you a better idea. If you can give people a better idea, you change their expectations, you change their behavior, you change what they want, you change the way they vote, maybe. This is how I think good think tanks influence public policy, by putting new ideas in people's heads and getting them to demand better and showing them how
agree.
will improve things.
Totally agree. Canada as a middle power doesn't often exercise its middle power status effectively. It's surprising to me that think tanks in Canada haven't been more aggressive in that space, and it certainly sounds like MLI has been and is doing the job just wonderfully. Tell me, how old is MLI?
Well, so we're going to be, I believe, 13 in the spring. So, there are lots of think tanks that are older, have bigger budgets than we do. But on the other hand, we're the most mentioned think tank in Parliament. 500,000 people watched our videos last year, 50,000 times. We were mentioned in the
Hold your
media.
thought. We'll come back after commercial break. We're back with Brian Lee Crowley of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Canada's premier think tank. Brian, you described Canada as a rare jewel in the human experience in one of your books, and I totally agree. I was born in a war-torn communist country that couldn't provide me the opportunities that Canada has. Your life work seems to have been dedicated to creating conditions for prosperity through wise policy. Share some of those victories that are projects and victories that the Macdonald-Laurier Institute has embarked in over the years.
Yeah, I really feel very strongly, Vess, this idea that Canada is a rare jewel. When we think about all the new Canadians that have come to Canada, I used to have somebody who worked at the Institute. He said when his family arrived from Lebanon in Canada, he said they got off the plane and they kissed the ground, because Canada was a place that offered them a boundless opportunity that didn't, determine in advance, what your job opportunities were, or, how much money you could make, or whether your kids could go to university because you were a member of, the party elite or whatever. And so I believe that Canada as a land of opportunity is second to none in the world. Now, we can mess that up. No doubt about that. And I have, reservations about the directions things are going. But you ask about policy victories for the Institute. Let me mention just a couple. When the other members of the Five Eyes Alliance, Canada is a member of the most important intelligence sharing network in the world, the Five Eyes Alliance, that brings together the United States, Australia, Britain, New Zealand, and Canada. The other members of the Five Eyes Alliance years ago decided that Huawei, a Chinese company, could not be trusted to supply equipment for the development of our 5G telecom network. And we were the loudest and most consistent voice in Canada, urging the government of Canada to do this. They didn't want to do it, but we created, along with lots of other people who talked about this issue, we helped to create a climate of public opinion. Again, back to this idea that ideas matter. We created a climate of public opinion in which, even though the government didn't want to ban Huawei, they ended up having to do so. And I can give you lots of examples of other places. People say, well, what's the point of being a think tank? If the government doesn't agree with you, they won't do what you recommend. I'm here to tell you that's nonsense. I got all kinds of things they didn't want to do. Ban Huawei, buy the F-35 fighter jet, toughen their policy towards China. All of these things, in my view, are instances of cases where we brought forward a better idea than the one the government was pursuing, and public opinion was so strongly on our side that the government had to give in, even though they didn't want to. So this is not a question of phoning up cabinet ministers and schmoozing in restaurants and buying people drinks and somehow thinking that you're going to affect public policy. What you have to do is you have to create the climate of public opinion in which the right choice is the only choice that politicians can make. And that's what we do.
So true. I do remember the Huawei situation, and I do remember Macdonald-Laurier Institute being so vocal and creating many forums where open discussion can occur. And what always impressed me was open discussion is true democracy, and true democracy, although imperfect in the way it gets to the end point, often does get to the end point. And I have seen with my own eyes how MLI has been able to facilitate and help people get to the right decision.
Yep. Well, and another example, which I'm particularly proud of, is, 12 years ago, we started talking about how economic opportunity for Indigenous people was the key to reconciliation. I think reconciliation is something that is deep in the hearts of Canadians. We want to achieve reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. But people were all hung up on all kinds of symbolic things, land acknowledgement. in my experience talking to Indigenous leaders, is that that's completely worthless to us. What we want is to be full participants in the opportunities that Canadian society offers. And we want to be able to use the land over which we have certain rights as a lever to create prosperity for our communities. We were the first ones to say that. And now 10 years or 12 years on, that's commonplace. People in the natural resource economy will tell you about how they're working with Indigenous people to develop opportunities and use natural resources as a lever to achieve a reconciliation. But 10, 12 years ago, when we talked about that, that was a new.
So important for Canada. Hold your thought. We'll be right back. Back with Dr. Brian Lee Crowley from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Brian, what distinguishes the MLI from organizations out there, I've noticed anyway, is that many are content with getting people just to talk, but nothing comes out of it. What I've found is that MLI comes to the table with solutions. And I recall very vividly when President Obama decided to implement Buy America in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Many Canadian manufacturers were shut out of the US market overnight. But I recall you were instrumental in helping finding solutions, suggesting options for Prime Minister Harper on how to get America to grant Canada an exemption. And that's just one example that I saw personally. I want to pick your brain and see what storm clouds do you see ahead in terms of energy and trade and our neighbors, and what the MLI might be able to do about it.
Well, a very interesting question, Bess. Look, I look around the world at, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, financed largely by, the purchase of Russian energy resources by the West. Germany's being vulnerable to energy blackmail from Russia because of that energy dependence. I look at Japan, which has just in the last couple of days announced a brand new, huge expansion of their national security, ambitions, protecting themselves from a rather aggressive China. I see all kinds of opportunities for Canada as a land of opportunity, endowed with tremendous natural resources, critical minerals, which China controls so much of the supply of, energy resources like oil and natural gas, which Germany, Japan, South Korea, and other friends and allies of Canada desperately need access to. I think there is a whole opportunity for Canada not only to raise its own standard of living by selling these resources, which we are so good at producing, but to strike alliances with, take those two examples I've already mentioned, Germany and Japan, and say, look, guys, we have the ability to wean you off oil from either the Middle East or from Russia. We don't have to send all that money to regimes that don't necessarily wish us well in the West. And if we supply you with this secure energy, perhaps you can help us in our drive to try and lower the emissions that are generated by those energy sources. So it's a win all round. We get more prosperity. They get more secure energy sources. We stop financing bad regimes around the world, and we contribute to an improved environment. Because my view is, if we want to combat climate change, the way to do it isn't by leaving the oil and gas in the ground. It's by removing the carbon from the fuels, or capturing the carbon when we consume the fuels, so that we don't, as a result of using these carbon fuels, in which we are so rich, we don't degrade the environment. And I think that's entirely possible, and is an outcome that would be good for Canada and our friends and allies.
Totally agree. It sounds like MLI already has a file open on that. Is that right?
Oh, more than one. And we're building relationships around the world with these countries that desperately want Canada to be a major participant in the definition of the new world order, if I can put it that way. But they don't always find a good partner in the government of Canada. So when they're looking to find out what Canadians think, and also to bring messages to the Canadian public and policymakers, they find a partnership with us is often very fruitful for them.
Some have told me that if we doubled our oil and gas exports in the next 5 to 10 years, Canada could be debt-free in about a decade. Does that ring true to you?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers on it, but we have this tremendous endowment of natural capital in the form of our energy resources, and I understand the reflex that makes people want to say leave them in the ground because they don't understand how it is we can use those fuels and not degrade the environment. But I believe it's entirely possible. This is on a program about innovation. This is exactly one of the things we want to talk about, because the way to allow Canadians to capitalize on this natural endowment is to invest some of the wealth that's created by resources in the technological innovation that allows us to use those resources without damaging the environment. That's
Absolutely. And Canada's proven that it can do that and has done that in the past, and it can do it in the future. We'll be right back. I'm back with Dr. Brian Lee Crowley from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute from Ottawa. This is the part of the show where we ask our guests, if you were king for a day, what would you do to unleash Canada's economic prowess and maximize prosperity and actualize our full potential? Brian, you have the floor.
Well, look, my answer might surprise you, Bess, because I actually think that the biggest challenge that Canada faces, and the one where we desperately need to do better, is in the integrity of our institutions and our politics. I actually believe that we have allowed institutions. I mean, just think about all the ethics scandals and the complete disappearance of the convention that when a minister gets caught in an ethics violation or something, they are honor bound to resign. People laugh at that idea now. I look at our electoral politics. The fact that we have two parties that are kind of neck and neck in the polls, which is difficult enough, but at a level of about 30% support each, which is not enough to claim a national mandate for either party in an election. In my estimation, we have a society in which trust in our institutions has been broken. People pay billions and billions of dollars in taxes to a government that can't even issue them a passport, and they spend days and days in the queue trying to get a passport. And the government's reaction to that isn't to improve the production of passports, but to buy chairs for people to sit in while they're waiting. It just seems to me that Canada used to be an extremely well-run society. We weren't a very exciting place, but the world looked at us as a place where government was competent, organized, thoughtful, didn't try to do too many things, but the things it did try to do, it did well. And I think all of those things are receding in the rearview mirror. And we can't get major infrastructure built. We can't get pipelines. We can't get major highways. We have a deficit of about 200,000 houses a year, which we're not getting built. If you compare the housing stock with the size of the population, we're falling behind all the time. Federal provincial relations seem to be a mess. The federal government, the provinces don't trust each other. I think these are all terrible problems, which the federal government in particular bears a major share of responsibility for. I think our allies look at us and say, if we needed help in some serious crisis in Ukraine or in Japan, in the South China Sea or whatever, would we call Canada? Well, it would be pretty far down on the list because Canada wouldn't be able to bring many resources to the table. And that's what your friends and allies want. They want friends and allies who can do things for them.
You're
Uh,
so right. It
and-
seems to me that the Canadian reputation has suffered a little bit of a hit over the last little while. You know, seizing bank accounts didn't go over well. Trucker convoy protest, how it was handled was kind of heavy-handed. And it seems to me that there's a lot of room for Canada to get back on that freedom train, because everybody knows Canada to be the country of freedom.
well, you know, I think that until we earn back some respect and trust from Canadians for the decisions that government makes, it doesn't matter what grand plans you might have for government. We need to have faith in the ability of government, and I think that you know, taxes have gone sky high. You know, I have a friend who runs a German institute's office here in Canada. He's been posted all over the world representing this institution. He says that the tax burden he's paying in Canada is higher than any other country he has been assigned to.
So true, so true. Brian, we have to cut it there. I wish we had more time. Your points are so well reasoned and compelling, and we must have you back to complete the discussion. Best of luck. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators, where today we had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Brian Lee Crowley, head of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. Do you have an interesting story to share? Write to us at ideas@thenewsforum.ca, and we may see you on the next show. Thank you for watching. I'm Sobot.